Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone to this program hosted by the Women in International Trade DC chapter. My name is Andrea Durkin and I'm a past president of WIT. While people are joining, I just want to take a moment to offer a little commercial for WIT. So really pleased when I look at the list of attendees today that we have WIT members, but we have a good number of non-WIT members. So I want to take the opportunity to encourage all of you to consider joining. There's a great opportunity coming up. We're presenting our annual awards on October 12th, and it will be virtual again this year, so there's no cost to attend. And I think if you tune in for that, what you'll see is a really high caliber and supportive and very welcoming professional community. And so I encourage you to consider joining us. Today, WIT is kicking off what might turn into a series on cybersecurity and the nexus with trade policy. It's a really important topic that we haven't covered very much before. And I want to thank our moderator today, Elizabeth Blackland, for suggesting it and also for her effort to create the panel today. We've gathered three leading experts in cyber and trades policy to focus today through a particular lens, which is the need to build cybersecurity into the design of the kind of large-scale infrastructure projects in emerging and developing markets that the US government is often involved in supporting in one way or another, whether it's through feasibility studies or trade financing. And of course, they're the type of projects that leading US companies want to be involved in providing cybersecurity infrastructure for. So that's the lens we're going to take this morning. But we also want to take a few moments to hear how the panelists have mainstreamed cybersecurity policy into their trade careers. So I'm pleased to turn the session over to Elizabeth Blackland, who is our moderator for today. And she's going to introduce our panelists, but first I want to introduce Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the CEO of Blackland Associates, a consultancy that specializes in supporting companies engaged in digital and technology projects, particularly in developing and emerging markets. And in her vast experience over 20 years, Elizabeth has worked with companies such as Westinghouse, Lucent Technologies, Avaya, and Cisco Systems. So her expertise is deep, and we're very happy that she's here today to moderate. Just a comment about logistics. We have both a Q&A function and the chat function. If you have a question for the panelists as we go, just please throw it in the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on that. And you can feel free to put links and comments in the chat function. So with that, Elizabeth, over to you. And thank you so much for moderating today.
Well, thank you, Andrea, so much. It was a pleasure working with you all on this. And thank you all for joining us on this first, which we hope will be a series of cybersecurity discussions. As we discussed today, we're fortunate to have three cybersecurity experts on this, whether it be the Colonial Gas Pipeline ransomware attack last May, which affected the gas supply of the eastern US, or the recent attack on New Cooperative in Iowa, involving the critical infrastructure of our food supply chain. Cybersecurity is entering our world every day. We have three panelists who are experts in their area, and we're very fortunate to have them all. Let me go ahead and introduce them. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Danielle Kriz, first of all, is a senior director for global policy at Palo Alto Networks. She has 25 years of technology, cybersecurity, and trade policy expertise. And she was director for global cybersecurity policy at the Information Technology Industry Council. Danielle began her career with a decade in the US government with the US International Trade Commission and the US Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration, where she spearheaded the US government's work on cybersecurity as it intersects with trade. We also have Lisa Cope. Lisa Cope is the Senior Director and Manager for Sub-Saharan Africa at the US Trade and Development Agency, USTDA. There she serves as the agency's cybersecurity sector lead on the telecommunications team. Lisa has over a decade of experience working on infrastructure projects across Africa and is currently responsible for business development, project preparation and evaluation, and supervision of USTDA activities in East Africa. She has worked on deals in over 20 African countries in telecom, oil and gas, trade facilitation, energy, environment, and transportation. And finally, but not lastly, we have Pompeia Lambrecht. She is a senior international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service in Northern Virginia. Pompeia is responsible for the e-health and ICT sectors and is the global cybersecurity lead for trade promotion. She started her commercial service career in Washington, D.C., and has been working with small and large-sized companies for almost 30 years. All right, so I thought we would start with a round of discussion on basically cybersecurity. And we're encouraging, as Andrea mentioned, questions from our audience too. I'll be keeping an eye on those questions with Andrea as we dive into our discussion. So first of all, thank you panelists for joining us in this discussion. I'd like to begin with a question of each of you to describe how cybersecurity intersects with the role each of you have in your organization. And Danielle with Palo Alto Networks, let's begin with you.
Great, thanks Elizabeth, and thanks Andrea, and thanks everyone for listening today. For those that aren't familiar with Palo Alto Networks, all we do is cybersecurity, so it's a big intersection with my job and what we do. So we are the world's largest cybersecurity company. We have more than 82,000 customers, government and enterprise customers around the world. We make hardware, software, and an array of cloud-delivered attached services, and our technologies use automation to prevent cyber attacks on our customers' networks. So relevant to this panel, we are headquartered in California, but we do business in 150 countries around the world. So trade is very, very important to us, and we work with Pompeia and Lisa and their agencies on a number of activities. And in addition, our customers include infrastructure companies in all kinds of infrastructure sectors around the world. So we secure companies in the transportation sector, like rail, airports, and ports, utilities such as energy, oil and gas, water, smart city infrastructure, and telecom. So, I work on cybersecurity policy for Palo Alto Networks, work with governments around the world as they develop cybersecurity strategies and policies. But given my background in international trade, I also work on some of the trade policies for my company. So definitely see that intersection. So I'll turn it over to the next panelist.
All right, Pompeia.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a really nice introduction, except for that time in service. I like the 20 much better than the 30, but thank you. Anyway, so thanks for joining us. I work for the U.S. Commercial Service, U.S. Department of Commerce, which, you can think of our part of the International Trade Administration as the U.S. export promotion arm of the U.S. government. I specifically here in my area, Northern Virginia, while I cover the IT sector, my focus has been cybersecurity, just because there is an abundance of cybersecurity talent and U.S. cybersecurity companies. Our government provides a lot of the skill set, and then of course we purchase a lot of the solutions as well. And therefore, there's a huge concentration of cybersecurity in this area. My main focus with the cybersecurity companies is to help them grow their international footprint. As Danielle from Palo Alto Networks attested, we work with them. And the way we do it, we have a presence in about 80 countries, and we make the introductions to potential business partners, to end users, of course, government officials where that may be important for the project at hand, and so forth. Specifically in the case of foreign government tenders, U.S. companies can apply for U.S. advocacy, where we can step in and hopefully provide a conduit to the foreign governments, where hopefully this increases the chance of the U.S. companies winning the government procurement. Very important to note is that, of course, Palo Alto Networks is a very, very large company. And we do also work and support with small companies as well, like SyncDoc, which is in the mobile cybersecurity space, and Analytica, that does the threat detection solutions and analytics for ICS, for industrial control systems. So thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And Lisa, if we could hear from you.
Great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. And many thanks to WIT for hosting and my fellow panelists, and for Andrea Durkin for leading this effort, as well as Elizabeth Blackland. So yeah, I'm Lisa Cope. I'm the senior manager on the Africa team at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, or USTDA. And what we do is we're really like the project preparation agency of the U.S. government. So we fund project development, whether it's like feasibility studies or design or anything really before financial close for large infrastructure projects. And the types of infrastructure we work on can range from really anything within the energy sector to telecom infrastructure to transportation infrastructure, like airports or freight rail or ports. As well as like healthcare infrastructure and agribusiness. And cybersecurity is really a critical element for something to consider at an early stage, and really like laying the foundation for smart, resilient, and sustainable infrastructure. And so I actually lead our efforts within the agency, even though I'm Africa focused. I have a global focus in terms of cybersecurity. And I'm really charged with understanding like how we can address cybersecurity at the early stage where USTDA engages to really lay the foundations for that resilient infrastructure, which I'm really excited to be a part of and to work with such experts as my fellow panelists. I should also mention that in addition to funding that project preparation work, we also organize events to connect stakeholders from overseas markets. And again, we only work in emerging markets to US companies because as an agency, we're focused on foreign assistance, but also on supporting US industry overseas, similar to Pompeia. So we work really closely with Pompeia's team. We work really closely with US companies like Palo Alto Networks. And I think there's a lot of really exciting innovation in this space in cybersecurity in particular. And so we're able to use our tools, whether it's in sort of the grant funding at the early stage for project preparation, or like the events that connect overseas stakeholders with US companies to really help facilitate that. Thank you.
Lisa, to build on that topic a little bit more, and as we look at these large scale infrastructure projects in developing and emerging markets, and I know we have a lot of cybersecurity companies who are audience members right now as well. You mentioned some of the things that TDA is doing to help these US businesses. Maybe all of you could touch upon and build on that as well to tell us what the government and the private sector are doing to promote this secure infrastructure.
Yeah, maybe I'll just go ahead and start just talking about this, which is, yeah, I mean, at the early stage where we engage, I think what we're trying to do more is encourage our overseas partners to kind of take a risk-based approach to cybersecurity and really start thinking about it at an early stage. And cyber, I think historically, I think there's sort of been an evolution of, how it's been assessed. But I think now there's more of a focus on understanding that it's a really dynamic space and something that's not just on like the telecom ICT side or just banking, but it's more overarching and something that should be considered, particularly with the rise of like Internet of Things and smart infrastructure, because anything that's really connected, obviously, like needs to really, you need to assess the cyber components of anything that is connected to the internet. So I think like we are trying to work with overseas partners, whether it's governments or the private sector, to really consider this for all projects. And it's something I think that the US government is really looking at as well. I just want to give a plug for some of my US government colleagues. I know CISA does, they do training for industrial control systems. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation has training for technical staff of the electrical sector, for example. And there's also like power sector cybersecurity building blocks, which I'd be happy to share, that was developed through USAID and NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Lab. So I'd be happy to share information about what my US government colleagues are doing in terms of like cyber training to think about this as an early stage, at an early stage, to support our overseas partners if that's of interest.
Thank you, Lisa. And Danielle, I think we talked about this in the past quite a bit about when should you start planning from a company perspective or a government perspective? When should you start incorporating the ideas of cybersecurity into these infrastructure projects, and why?
Yeah, well, I'll just really echo what Lisa said. I mean, we are well beyond the stage where cybersecurity could be an afterthought and built on or retroactively fitted into any kind of project. The cyber attackers are increasingly sophisticated. They're very automated. They're very industrious. They're always innovating, just as we are innovating. So as Palo Alto Networks, we often say, our competition is not necessarily other cybersecurity companies. Our competition is the cyber criminals, because they are innovating as quickly as we can invent ways to block the attack. So that will not change. For better or for worse, there's a lot of money to be made in cyber attacks. We're seeing it in ransomware. You mentioned the Colonial Pipeline incident, right? So where there's money, there will be crime. So especially as so much infrastructure now that's coming on board, it is digitally connected, right? It's never going to be not digital at this point. So at the very design phases, when governments or organizations are thinking, hey, I want to plan my next rail system or my port or my hospital, right? You've got to be thinking about cybersecurity from the beginning. And I will say too, even if you're just adding on to existing infrastructure, maybe modernizing, there are still ways that you should be thinking about, like building security. And I think Pompeo mentioned like OT companies and security in all these different areas. There are attacks becoming more sophisticated in all of those areas, but there's also a lot of investment that can be made by governments and industries in that space. So again, I think some people think, oh, it's so expensive, I can't really afford to be building security in at the beginning. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot more expensive if you don't build it in, because you risk, lost, business information, customer information, intellectual property, downtime of infrastructure systems. So it's definitely something to be factored in at the beginning.
Thank you. And Pompeo, we'd love to hear from you as the global cybersecurity lead for trade promotion. What is the U.S. Commercial Service doing to promote these ideas as well?
So we support, what the whole of government is doing with the foreign governments. So we collaborate, we, have speaking engagements, we have roundtables, like in October, it's Cybersecurity Month globally. And I know we have engagements going on around the world. We also, of course, coordinate with our State Department colleagues in messaging to the foreign governments. We have webinars, and right now because of COVID, but typically we'll have roundtables, in-person roundtables to have these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and our next round of questions, according to one study by a group called Analytics Insights, the US is ranked #1 globally for its cybersecurity expertise, with a majority of digital security organizations situated here. Pompeo, from your perspective at the US Commercial Service, what are some of the top challenges, do you think, to US companies as they look to export their goods and services?
Right. So, it comes down to, from what I hear, and this is, of course, feedback from the cybersecurity companies themselves. This is not, my opinion. They say that one of the top challenges tends to be budgets, because once you step outside the United States, Western Europe, and Singapore, these budgets are much lower. And then, of course, there's also the difference from one country to the next in terms of their levels of maturity and understanding of the cybersecurity industry. There could be like less knowledge in terms of what each of the solutions do and what their exact value is. And therefore, companies tend to spend more time in education, marketing materials, proof of concepts. So those are, two of very important factors in terms of challenges. And then I also see, cybersecurity companies it's a scarce resource. It's a scarce resource here in terms of solutions in the United States, but globally, and as well as the cybersecurity professionals, right? So whenever you go into a new country, there's quite a bit of training that needs to happen, and so those are, I think, what I see as some of the top challenges when they go overseas.
Thank you, Pompeia. And Danielle, what are you seeing as Palo Alto Networks as some of your main obstacles to exporting?
Sure, and I think I'll just kind of putting on my former hat, working in trade in the U.S. government, and then combining that with cybersecurity. I think at the end of the day, we make hardware and software and ICT services. It's a subset of the larger technology field, but it's part of that, right? So traditionally in the tech industry, companies, whether the US companies or any company, they want to be able to build one product and sell it globally, not have to meet various country specific standards or country specific certifications, or face market access issues, or other barriers like that. So we as a technology company at heart, we make a certain technology that has a certain function, but we make technology, right? So we are, especially in cybersecurity though, I mean, every government now at this stage around the world has some kind of cybersecurity strategy or regulation or policy, which is great. Governments should be prioritizing cybersecurity and doing what they can to secure their economies and to secure their own government networks. But at the end of the day, the policy should be globally workable. And pointing to global security standards, there are many global security standards out there developed by industry. Some are process standards, like the ones at the NIST framework. I think a lot of people might be familiar with. It's about cybersecurity risk management. Any company in any industry can use those standards because every company now has technology. They need to manage their cyber risks. But there's also product standards that might be unique to different types of hardware or software. But again, they are being developed globally in standards development organizations and a very open voluntary process around the world. And there are often accompanying certifications or accreditations that you might get depending on the product and depending on the end use. That's not the case for all cybersecurity technologies by any means, but again, we, and I'm hopefully speaking for most other companies, we want to be able to replicate what we're doing, right? So get a global, align to a global ISO standard, or if you do need a certification, have that be global. I think one other area that can be challenging is data localization. I know a lot of us in the trade world are very familiar with the trend of the last decade plus of governments feeling like data needs to stay within their borders for various reasons. One stated reason is for security. A lot of the focus is on personal data, but then often that spills over into all kinds of data. From a cybersecurity perspective, for us to be able to spot cybersecurity attacks and understand the attacks, we're looking globally at the attacks that are happening on our customer base, and we're able to aggregate, the attacks that we're seeing and create a pattern and a picture, just like any kind of like forensics, right? Or you're solving a crime, you have different clues. When you put all that together, you can see what the attack is, and then we can develop a preventive measure to stop that. So we rely on the global view of security data. So I'm not talking about personal information itself, but security data, the indicators of compromise or the different attack techniques. That is what we use to understand what's happening and then again prevent it, and then to push that prevention out to our customers. So and we also do threat research, which means that researchers have to collaborate around the world. So cross-border data flows are really important to have the highest level of security around the world. And so data localization policies can be troublesome for the cybersecurity industry also. So those are some of my initial remarks on kind of the trade angle, and we'll leave it, I think, to Lisa at this point.
Thank you, Danielle. And Lisa, I know USTDA, you worked a lot with groups like Palo Alto Networks and the private sector in general on policy issues related to cybersecurity. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that one thing we've been trying to do a bit more, although we're not a policy-focused agency, is working with other agencies within the U.S. government that are policy-focused to marry that with, bringing together USTDA's mandate of sort of a commercial U.S. commercial focus. And so we have standards workshop programs that we're doing in Sub-Saharan Africa or globally as well. We're bringing a lot of these points that Danielle just brought up, and the importance of like standards and regulations and cross-border flows. They come up quite a bit actually in terms of our topics for our reverse trade missions, which again are like focused on seeing U.S. industry, and typically in person in the U.S. And U.S. manufacturing, but also, having a regulatory focus and understanding like what we consider from a U.S. perspective, given our strength in this sector. And I would say another key, just a challenge that I've noticed a lot, and Elizabeth, you actually mentioned this to me directly before this panel, but I think it's a really important one to bring up, is just like the challenge of financing. And I think that's another key issue that USTDA really comes in and can help address at an early stage, because we fund project planning to help prepare infrastructure projects really to go to banks and get financing, and understanding like at an early stage that you need to consider cybersecurity in a power generation project. Allows for it to sort of be a part of this package that you take to financiers and say like, hey, this is, a key part of how we're trying to make sure that this infrastructure is resilient, and ultimately might even make the project more bankable, because you're taking like this approach that considers like these are all of the risks to the project, and you're addressing this. So I think even though I think financing is often raised as a barrier to like to really making purchases of cybersecurity solutions and considering it, at the same time, I think most people are really well aware of like the costs that would come, if you don't consider that like at an early stage. And I think USTDA funding is actually really, and USTDA support is actually really helpful for, considering this like at the feasibility study stage, to make sure you're looking at that as a part of your full, implementation plan and ultimately like financing package. So I just wanted to note that as well.
Lisa, I think that's a very important point. And I'd be very interested in all of the companies that are on our call today to hear if that's what you're experiencing, if this is one of your top obstacles in your cybersecurity projects and an obstacle to exporting your goods and services. And Pompeia, maybe I could return to you one moment. Is this what you're hearing from a lot of the US companies, the US cybersecurity companies? Is financing a large obstacle from what you're hearing?
Yes, for the large projects, precisely, right? So, and that's where we come down to, I think at this point, everybody knows they need the cybersecurity solution, but, who has the budget? Where's the budget? Especially in these times recently where a lot of governments have shifted. It has been an interesting and horrible situation where, because of pandemic, governments have shifted course towards, of course, the COVID situation, and their monies have gone there and efforts. At the same time, it created a huge increase of risk because there's been a huge increase for cyber attacks since the pandemic started. So now the governments, they can only, give so much, and where's that budget going to come from?
Exactly. I think we also have people who are dialing in from potentially financing or funding groups, and feel free to ask any questions on your side as well. Yeah, Danielle, are you, when you think about Palo Alto's perspective on where internationally it might be most interesting for opportunities in the cybersecurity sector, do you have several regions or a particular region that's more attractive, and why is that?
Yes, that's such a good question. We talked about that a little bit on a prep call earlier. You know, cybersecurity, I think is for everything I say about being it's part of the tech sector and it's, you know, a subset of that, it is distinct, right? So the demand, there's so many variables. You know, again, we do business in 150 countries around the world. I think it shows that every country on the planet, you know, is interested in security or wants security, which is great. You know, I think there are just various things to think about. I mean, I think as we've made clear on this call, cybersecurity is it's hard to quantify the results of the spending because you kind of have to prove a negative if you put the right investments in place. And that's not just technology, that's people, that's processes, that's, you know, treating cybersecurity as a business and organizational risk and not just a technology issue. If you get all of your investments right, you might not actually be able to point to anything because you hopefully prevented attacks from happening, right? So I think that's a challenge in you know, regardless of the whether you're talking about a developed country or developing, but I think it's probably even more challenging in developing countries because as Pompeo said, you know, budgets might be low, and I think as we all know, COVID has certainly changed priorities. What's interesting in cybersecurity is also geopolitics come into play. So based on history or animosity between certain countries or regions of the world, you know, certain countries might be more of a target for attacks than others. You know, that might be bigger, you know, the smaller country might be a bigger attack than even a bigger country because just of, again, historical geopolitical reasons. So there's a lot of different factors that play into that. So, and I think most cybersecurity companies would feel that as well. I think, you know, one thing that helps drive different levels of demand is, you know, what is that country prioritizing? I mean, a lot of cybersecurity now is related to the cloud. You know, some countries are faster than others in adopting the cloud. And when you adopt the cloud, obviously you want to secure that data as it moves into the cloud. So there's different trends, you know, and obviously some countries have a lot more mobile penetration than others. And so you'll have more of a need for mobile related security or endpoint security. You know, so it kind of depends too on how far along in the IT kind of, you know, life cycle
for their infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I think those are very important points. And Pompeia, I know the U.S. Commercial Services has several different events where you either focus on opportunities in a regional perspective, such as Latin America or the ASEAN countries or Africa. Are you seeing more interest from these countries for U.S. services and infrastructure? And if so, which region do you think is probably the best target for U.S. exporters?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I don't know if, you know, I mean, I wish I could say, but I don't think, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's always the big ask, right? But we have that even here in the US too. So yeah, huge demand for that.
All right. Well, that's another opportunity for US training and education institutions, I think, in the cybersecurity field. Are you seeing that as well, Danielle?
Yes, I mean, we partner with universities and colleges around the world that themselves train students in the next generation in cybersecurity. So we offer, it's our Cybersecurity Academy program, where we offer free equipment and curriculum, and it's training the trainer to help bring more people into the field. So and for us, that's free. So we think it's just something that we should do as a good corporate citizen, is to help train the next generation of students. And we also sponsor cybersecurity exercises and challenges, for high school students and for college students. But that said, people do need to be trained. So I'm sure that companies that do offer as their main offering training and skill building, I would assume that there's going to be a lot of business for them. I think there's just a huge dearth of people in the field. I mean, I think I will make one plug though for the role of technology, because even if we trained every single person, I don't even know what the latest data is on how many hundreds of thousands of people we need to train globally in cybersecurity, but even if we train them all, there still wouldn't be enough, right? Because again, the attackers are very sophisticated and use automation. So, I think to the extent that organizations can use automation to block the attacks, you can block 80 to 90% of them, and then you leave the work for the people where their skills are most aligned. But we absolutely need to train those people, and we need general awareness. It's not just does someone need to know how to code and build cybersecurity solutions, but how do they secure their daily life, right? How do they have that basic awareness and know not to click on suspicious links, or not to listen when they get an email from the CEO of their company saying to wire $2 million to a contractor at 5 p.m. on a Friday, when you realize that was a fake email. So there's a lot of educating that needs to be done.
And Lisa, I've seen very many of these events that you're sponsoring from TDA for ASEAN sector specific, say healthcare or financial services related to cybersecurity. But are you also hearing from potential customers of US cybersecurity companies? Are you hearing that they need some training, that maybe some of the foreign governments need training on cybersecurity awareness before there are opportunities for US companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we're always being asked for training. And I think cybersecurity is an interesting sector in the fact that it's just so dynamic. And so the training really kind of needs to be constant. It's not like a one and done situation. It's like constant understanding of like how cybersecurity is really morphing. And as Danielle mentioned, it's, threat actors can be very sophisticated, and it's always changing. It is something that we look at. It's not included in like everything that we do, but it is an element of some of our workshops, some of our reverse trade missions, and some of our like project preparation, feasibility study type work. It's we work with a lot of U.S. companies actually on understanding, like just as Danielle was mentioning, some of the training that they can offer, because what we found is that quite a bit from US companies, the solution that they can offer is not just like the technology itself or the software, but sort of like that long-term sustainability view of providing the training and the services to make sure that you're again taking an approach to cybersecurity that's not just like, here's the technology, here's the software, but really how do we make sure that your like workforce is able to like understand threats. And because really I think that's a key element of cybersecurity are the individuals within an organization. And so I think it's really a key element, something we consider, and I think we're trying to understand like how we can better consider that across all types of transactions that we work, not just like a cybersecurity planned that we maybe do as a technical assistance activity. We've shared some resources on what we've seen has been helpful in terms of like what the US can provide in training and across the US government, because I have a lot of sister agencies at like the State Department, DHS, USAID, and NIST and others that really can provide a lot of this good technical training. But also we're trying to better understand like how we can weave that in, understanding the fact that it's a dynamic sector and it needs to just be constant, not one and done.
Yeah, that's very important. I also think the question we had earlier regarding China and China's role in Africa, I think that's where US companies really have an advantage, because US companies go in, as you all know, and train everyone on the equipment and services and make sure that there's capability that's left behind and that you leave empowered people to use the cybersecurity goods and services that you've installed and trained them on. Are you seeing this as an opportunity, Pompeia, to combat some of the Chinese dominance, I would say, in Africa that we've been seeing for a very long time?
No, I feel like maybe I should not say anything on that subject, if that's okay. Yeah.
That's okay.
I'll pass that one.
Yeah. And Danielle, I think you've seen many of the same things as other US companies of US expertise leading the way. And that's the very positive side of what US companies can do as they train people as they go along, that we're used to bringing people in and training them on cybersecurity and leaving people who are able to train the trainer. I think that's a very important factor and an advantage for US companies. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Sorry, get myself off mute. I'm assuming probably a lot of other companies are doing training as well. I'm not in country as much, but I mean, I'm not our salespeople who are on the front line in our academy program that are working with the universities in these countries. But I do know that US companies like ours do our best to really offer what we can, in terms of that training, whether it's to university students or, if governments themselves are interested in learning about cybersecurity, either how to, manage the risks within their own organization. Sometimes they're interested in threat briefings, what are our threat analysts and researchers seeing? What are the trends? That's always very helpful for them. So I think, I think for any company, again, in any space, the before sales support and the during sales support and the after sales support that you provide, regardless of what type of technology you provide, can be very helpful. And we as a company, I know we do have a range of kind of like after sales support. So I think that to the extent that that can be a differentiator for other companies, I think that's very important.
Thank you. Yeah, and Lisa, I think this is such an advantage, especially during COVID, when a lot of companies can't travel to these places. They're not supposed to be using the airlines and going anywhere at this point still. Do you envision at some point bringing delegations over again, or how are you approaching that with, say, bringing different country representatives over and learning about what US companies have to offer?
Yeah, at the moment, I would say a lot of our work just has been virtual, given that like the situation with COVID-19 is different by country. And so we definitely consider that. Hopefully in the future, again, we'll be able to have cybersecurity reverse trade missions, which, as I mentioned, is where we bring over overseas stakeholders to the US to meet with US industry regulators and financiers and really talk through their projects. So I think that's hopefully something we'll be able to do, eventually again. But right now we're trying to do virtually, and we're also hosting virtual workshops as well, and some hybrid workshops. So please stay tuned for those. I think at the moment we don't actually have any upcoming events as an agency right now in cybersecurity, but I think that will probably change in the near future. I know just over the past year, we did quite a bit. So we had actually just last year, we had a cybersecurity event focused on supporting Central America. And I believe Palo Alto Networks and Commerce were both a part of that. And that was focused on Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We've had a number of events that have been focused on the Indo-Pacific region over the past year as well as a number of projects that we're doing. So one in the Philippines, for example, where we're working with the Bureau of Internal Revenue to support the modernization of their core IT systems. And that has a really strong cybersecurity component. So I think there's a lot to come. There's a lot that we've been doing ongoing over the past year, but happy to keep this group updated on that.
Great, thank you. And I think all of us saw, at least the panelists, there are other cybersecurity events that are being organized by the World Bank, the different groups that are also looking at maybe working together with groups like TDA to say, okay, there are opportunities for training, there are opportunities to describe what's going on in these countries and how from a development perspective, cybersecurity is so important. Danielle, I know we've talked in the past about the idea of cybersecurity by design, and that if we can describe it and get it involved in the beginning of these infrastructure projects, that will be much less heartache later on in the process.
Absolutely. And, I've been in this field for a long time here in Washington, and I, learned probably within the last 10 years that groups like USTDA, but also the World Bank and others were beginning to, I don't know if mandate's the right word at this point, but beginning to really make that a requirement, hopefully a requirement of a lot of these projects and getting the grant funding, because I think there's this growing understanding that it can't be an afterthought, and if the U.S. government is going to be funding these projects, that is going to take a lot of investment. That if you're going to be applying for some of these grants and funds, show that you've thought about cybersecurity, right? I mean, the answer that what you thought about, it's up to you to figure out what that's going to be. But it's been great to see that that's been evolving over the years. So I don't know if Lisa has anything kind of seeing that from the inside, but that's something I just noticed in a lot of the chatter, particularly around Washington, when we used to meet up in person and talk to people at events.
Lisa, is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the approaches have changed over time. Like I keep mentioning the risk-based approach, but I mean, I think like, even I've been covering the Africa portfolio for a bit over a decade. And I've seen like the interest and understanding of cybersecurity morph and change over time. And I would say more and more often, a lot of our stakeholders are asking us specifically to make sure that we consider cybersecurity in our project planning funding, which I think is really great and important to see that like our overseas stakeholders are saying, this is something that they want assessed and they want USTDA supported in an early stage for various projects, even in healthcare. So that's something that I wasn't saying like 10 years ago, if we were considering like a healthcare project or even a power project. And it's really, shifted over time to where it's something that's like an important key discussion across sectors to look at cybersecurity. And it's not something that I don't even think we're driving. It's something that our partners who are looking to make procurements are driving. They want to make sure cybersecurity is considered when they purchase equipment. And I think that's a really helpful and exciting thing. And just, within the US government as well, it's definitely, I think, a key topic. We've shared a lot of the great resources that are being done across the US government. Especially in terms of training, which I think is really like the important foundation not just on infrastructure projects, but really for all of us as individuals. So I think that's something that's really exciting about the sector too. I think for me, I think I'm most excited, but also surprised at like how dynamic and changing the sector is. And I think there's just, it's not, I think I made this point before, but I think it's like an important one, which is just, it's not like a stagnant thing where it's like an established sector and you understand like this is sort of like the landscape. It's something that, you know, every few months or like every day even, there's something new to consider about different types of approaches. And I think that's what makes it kind of a cool sector to watch and be in. And, you know, because you're constantly learning and you have to be really adaptable to that. And I think it's really exciting that a lot of our partners, you know, whether it's within the US government, but also overseas are like, there's clearly a strong understanding of that and like a thirst to learn more and to like respond to that. And I think that's an exciting thing for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a lot to learn in this sector. And maybe we'll end with that question. Lisa, I'll ask you maybe to answer it first. If you could each take a couple minutes, each of our panelists, and give your thoughts on opportunities you might see for people with a trade background to combine that with cybersecurity.
Yeah, I will start first. So it's something I'm personally looking at myself. You know, cybersecurity is something that, you know, over the past like year or so is something that I've been trying to do a bit more and immerse myself in and learn. And as I mentioned, it isn't like a one and done thing. It's something that's constant. So I've shared some resources if you're interested in that training or any of those trainings that I've shared. You know, I think those could be helpful. Those have been shared in the chat. I should also note that there's civilportal.org, which I can also share in the chat, can be helpful to the group just to understand a bit more about cyber. There's various international organizations that can be helpful in terms of resources too. But again, you know, it's something that's just constantly changing and there's new resources popping up, even a lot of new companies and partners within the sector that I think are just really interesting to watch. So it's sort of like unlimited opportunities for learning.
Thank you, Lisa. And Danielle, what is your perspective on that?
Absolutely. I think the more people we get into this field, the better. Folks that are interested in both trade and cybersecurity. You know, I kind of made the transition myself about 15, 20 years ago from solely focused on trade and more focused on cybersecurity, but I still combine them all the time. And I think there's two dimensions. One is that, as I mentioned, all the trade issues that impact any type of company, particularly the technology industry, are just as important, if not more, for the cybersecurity segment of that industry. So, you know, again, we want, you know, global standards, global certifications. You know, there's just a lot of governments are trying to improve cybersecurity and, you know, coming up with ideas like, oh, we need labeling, or we need a new certification, or I want a new standard, or whatever. And, you know, you need to be thinking about what you can do to improve security while simultaneously promoting trade and innovation, because the more trade and innovation and the more you have the leading edge technologies in your market, the more secure you are, right? So it all feeds on each other. There has been in the last, I'd say, 5 or 8 years, you know, trade agreements are not a catch-all. They should be only including trade provisions that promote the trade of goods and services. But the TPP, which I forgot what it's called now, the CPTPP, as well as the USMCA, both have provisions either related to encryption or to the use of risk management standards for cybersecurity, and those were specifically narrowly targeted to address trade issues related to this field. And then I'll also say, you know, if you're really truly interested in trade itself, I mean, like most large companies will, you know, need people that do trade policy, right? So there's a plethora of work in this field, and you don't need to be an engineer, a technical computer science major to combine your interest in trade with cybersecurity.
Thank you, Danielle. And Pompeia, what advice would you give for someone with a trade policy background and opportunities in cybersecurity?
Well, I would say get ready for a lot of work, because are we in the beginning? Probably it's, trade and cybersecurity is totally connected. And as, the digital technologies keep accelerating and connecting us, business, governments, supply chains, it seems to be great, but at the same time, it just totally puts it out there with cyber attacks and increases our risks. And we have the, trade policies, that Danielle touched on, like the cross-border data flows, data localization, cybersecurity standards, and what are the different governments and their policies, right? So that's all, I think, in the works. And so for trade policy professionals, there's plenty of work to be done. And I think recently the EU-US Trade and Technology Council also had a meeting, and that's also a quote unquote relatively newly created council for having open dialogue about all these very important issues.
Thank you, Pompeia. And we've reached the end of our hour. I want to thank our panelists for your wonderful contributions. Thanks to our audience. And I've also attached in the chat section a little link if you have additional ideas for our future cybersecurity sessions. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks.